I have a bit of a problem because I'm doing something that I love, right? I'm teaching Sichos in a sequential way that bring out a greater point. And the greater point is, so to speak, the neshama, the spirit behind the Chumash. So we did Aharon and Yankev, we did Yosef and his brothers, now we're doing Exile and Redemption. But you always ask yourself the question, maybe I'm being too tedious, I'm spending too much time, too many sichos on the same topic, and you always ask yourself, should I move a little faster, should I move a little slower, should I skip a few sichos? Every week I sit down with my list of sichos that I need to do and then decide, A, which one I'm going to do, and B, which ones I should skip. And I'm having a harder and harder time skipping, which is not good, because skipping is important. In other words, there needs to be some kind of an energy. The last couple of weeks was the same topic. Lom harayosa, right? Why do you do this to the Jewish people? And the Eibush says Avram Avinu, to Moshe Avinu, Chaval da Abdim lo Mishtakchen, and so on. So, I have, I think, 4 or 5 sichos that I copied them, to teach them sequentially, and I don't know, should I teach them all, should I not teach them all, should I teach some of them? So I'm learning this sicha. It's really a Rashi sicha. It's a technical Rashi sicha. We don't do Rashi sichas. We certainly do not do technical Rashi sichas. We're trying to experience the spirit of Exodus, not the techno interpretation of Exodus. So why am I learning the sicha with you? If you look through the sicha, you see where I made my underlines. You see that I've been very cheap. I skipped whole sections of the sicha. There's nothing. Because what I'm trying to do is take a Rashi sicha and spin it to bring out not the pshat point, but the spiritual point, the neshama point, the transcendent point. The issue on the table is the dual leadership of Moshe and Aharon. The dual leadership of Moshe and Aharon, which means, theoretically, last year we learned a number of sichos about the tonality of Moshe Rabbeinu. We had several classes in this series explaining the unique place Moshe Rabbeinu had in the hierarchy of Jewish life and history. One of the details of that entire story is the role of his brother Aharon. You have in the Chumash, in Pashas Shmos, where Moshe tells the Eibishter that he thinks it's a very, very bad idea that he should be the leader. He spent no time in Egypt. He didn't suffer with the Jews. His brother and his sister, Aharon and Miriam, suffered with the Jewish people for 80 years, and then he comes out of the desert, he comes out of the wilderness, and he's the Redeemer. And the Eibishter says, your brother Aharon is coming to meet you in the desert. And when he sees you, he'll be delighted. You think he's going to be jealous. You're all wrong. And you have a unique partnership. Moshe and Aharon function as a single person. Now, of course, we're going to have a class. We have to have a class on Aral's Fasayim. It's in my stack someplace. Moshe Rabbeinu's inability to speak, which of course explains why he needs his brother Aaron's collaboration. Aaron speaks for him, but you don't have this kind of collaboration in later generations. This is unique to this generation, right? The Rashi says later in the Chumash, the Eibishter arranged his word that every generation has one leader, one spokesman. Here you have 2 men, brothers, sharing the mantle of leadership in a very intimate way, in a way which you don't see in later generations. Because you cannot call Aaron subordinate. He's not bottled to Moshe. He's one with Moshe. So, we'll get to the Araf Fasayim Sicha. It's on my list of things to do eventually, when we get to it. Today's class is about the nature of the duality of Moshe and Aaron's leadership. It revolves around several nuances, mamish, nuances in a Rashi. In other words, it's technically a Rashi Sicha. But what we're going to do is we are going to deep shot this pshat Sicha and see if we can get some kind of a neshama out of it. And I'm just going to tell you the secret. The secret is that in this Sicha, the Rebbe is going to analyze several Rashis and make the argument that goes as follows. There was a certain aspect of Moshe and Aharon which they were exactly the same. There's a certain aspect of Moshe and Aharon where they're very distinctly different. And in this duality of leadership, that Moshe and Aharon share both of these aspects, come forward. in what aspect are Moshe and Aaron exactly the same? As opposed to in what aspect are Moshe and Aaron distinct? The answer is very simple. In as much as Moshe and Aaron are who they are because of who their parents were, they're identical. They were brothers. In as much as they are who they are based on their own personal service, they're different. And in the dual leadership, both of these ideas come to the fore. It's brought out how Moshe and Aaron are exactly the same, and how Moshe and Aaron are distinctly different and yet collaborate and work together. The first aspect has to do with Moshe and Aaron as the children of Miriam, of Yocheved, and also Amram. The second aspect has to do with who Moshe Rabbeinu is in his personality and his role and function, and who Aaron is in his personality and his role and function. Let's read. Okay? Oifim pasuk hu Aaron Moshe. It says in the pasuk in Parashat Va'era, who Aaron and Moshe. They are Aaron and Moshe. And notice that Aaron's name comes before Moshe Rabbeinu's name. Asher Ama Avai Alehem, God Almighty says to them, Hoitziyu as Bnei Yisrael, remove the Jewish people from Egypt. Wo steht frier Aaron und noch Moshe. First, Aaron's name is mentioned, and Moshe Rabbeinu's name is mentioned. Now, there happens to be a fact that Aaron was older than Moshe Rabbeinu, and that pasuk follows a sequence which is talking about their genealogy, their birth, and Aaron was born first, so he's mentioned first. So on this pasuk, where Aaron's name is mentioned first, that Zokt Rashi as follows: Yesh Mekemis, there are instances. Shemagdam Aaron LaMoshe, Aaron's name is mentioned for Moshe Rabbeinu's name. V'yesh Mekemis Shemagdam Moshe Aaron. In other cases, Moshe Rabbeinu's name is mentioned first, and Aaron HaKohen's name is mentioned second. Why? Leimalach, to teach you Sheshkulin Te'echad, that they weigh the same. They're one. They're equal and they're one. Turn the page. Page 62. Only the underline. Heim hamedabrim. The pasuk after. One pasuk says who, Lashon Yachid, in singular, yeah? The very next pasuk says, Heim hamedabrim el pari melech Mitzrayim. They are the ones who speak to the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. Un is mefarish, says Rashi, Heim shenitztavu, Heim shenikaimu. They're the same ones who were instructed, and they were the same ones who carried it out. Second column, still page 62. Heim b'shlichusamu b'tekostam. Both of them are their mission and their righteousness. Metchila vatzei, from the beginning to the end. What Rabbi's going to do is show that the first pasuk, who Aaron and Moshe, and then the first read on the second pasuk are describing how Moshe and Aaron are the children of Yocheved and Amram, where they're exactly equal. And the second reading of the second pasuk, Heim b'shlichusamu b'tekostam metchila vatzei, is going to talk about how they're different. Let's find out. Okay? Page 63, bottom of the first column with the underliners. Men hatshein fried gelernt. We already learned. Wegen der Mutter von Moshe and Aaron, the mother of Moshe, whose name was Yocheved. As sie hat nicht ausgeführt gesehen, as Parei refused to carry out the instructions of Parei in Ben-Hu v'Amita and Esau to kill the sons. Nor vater enna hameyaldeis eso lekim. The midwives feared God. V'lai asu, they didn't do kasher diber aleihen. Melech Mitzrayim, what we're told to by the king of Egypt. Und nit bloß haben sie nit mekayim gewend. Denn v'amitanei say not only did they not kill them, nor noch mehr, but tachayenas hayelav actually gave them life. Says Rashi, misapkes le'mayim u'mazim echolu, give them water and food and so on. So Yocheved was a woman of Mesiras Nefesh. She defied the king. Sie hat sich mishtadel gewesen. She made every effort to turn out was she can, do everything she could, auf zu mevatel sein, die Geseire von Parei, to nullify the decree of Parei, und noch getan dem Hepech von them, and in fact did the exact opposite, that she looked after the children. Says the Rebbe, weil derach sie gefindt man, when he gets, says er Vater Amram. So Yocheved was clearly a woman of Mesiras Nefesh, took great risks, she risked her own life to save and to provide for the Jewish people. Her husband Amram was the same thing. How? Amram, as nit kukendik of Gezeiras Parei. We all know the story that Amram separated from Yocheved based on the argument that they're going to kill the children. And then Miriam Anaviyah comes along and says to her father, Shalacha, you're worse than Parei. Parei is killing the boys, you're killing the boys and the girls. So we took Yocheved again, and then Moshe Rabbeinu was born. Is a chazira for Asab al-Gurgatim. We brought her back and married her a second time. So, and that was a great act of sacrifice. Und das ist die Teire matim umadish. And that's what the Teire wishes to enrich and to emphasize. What is the reason that Aaron and Moshe are the Jewish leaders? And how is it that they're shockled, they're exactly the same? Says the Rebbe as follows. The tam v'siba from them, the reason, the cause of the fact. That Hashem speaks to Moshe and Aaron and commands them for the Jewish people and for the Pharaoh. As b'nei Yisrael me'eretz Mitzrayim, to take the Jewish people out of Egypt. Was the Rebbe and chose specifically them to arise for the Yidden from Mitzrayim, to take the Jewish people out of Egypt, is das Valhu Moshe v'Aaron, because of where they came from. Sheyoldo Yecheved la'Amram, since their parents were Yecheved and Amram. Says the Rebbe, to leave them schusun ma'ila, because of the merit and advantage of their mother and their father, for an avava'im, of their father and their mother, that their father and their mother were mezeh nefesh for having bringing Jewish children into the world, is oif in oifhalten and uflem batchayena, the Yidden Mitzrayim, to give life to and to sustain the Yidden Mitzrayim, then they geworden die, so they became those, was Amar ad Hashem lahem, God Almighty speaks to these people, and He tells them, Shahitziu as b'nei Yisrael, take the Jewish people out of Egypt. So the point is, the schus that Moshe and Aaron had to be the Jewish redeemers, they inherited from their ancestors. And in as much as this is concerned, exactly the same. Turn to page 65. Und der diok in them is, the nuance here is, shkulam ke'echa, that Moshe and Aaron are equal. Translates the Rebbe. Says, nid pshat, this doesn't mean, as Moshe and Aaron sind gleich, eine zum Zweiten, that Moshe and Aaron are the same. They're not the same. As they have beide dieselbe Dage from godless at the same level of greatness, and so on. They're very distinct. Not as in der Shlichos, when it came to this mission, so Arois nehmen Yidden from Mitzrayim, to take the Jewish people out of Egypt, sondern sie beide wie eine, they're both one. Beide sein Natel von eine und derselbe Shlichos, they're both part of the very same mission. And the reason is, because they come from the same parents. Moshe and Aaron are the same father, the same mother. They both inherited the property of Mesiras Nefesh from their parents. So in as much as the mission of redeeming the Jewish people is concerned, they're functioning as one. Go to the bottom of page 65, second column. I'm skipping a little bit. Al derech zeh, second paragraph from the bottom. Al derech zeh given dan Hage von Aaron and Moshe. The same is with Aaron and Moshe in their dibim and part of Nachman's time in their discussions with the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. As Chashtas was given verbunden mit Schwierigkeiten, it was very difficult. We detailed that Shafir Teddy relates before, as Pari had they gesagt, Pari told them, Lama Moshe v'Aaron tafrius am v'gemer l'chulis if leseichem v'gemer. Why are you taking the people away from their work? Go do your work. In other words, Moshe comes to the Pharaoh and asks the Jewish people should be allowed to go for 3 days of service. And what happens is he makes the Golos worse. They nevertheless went ahead and did it. The ribit is the pasuk mesif. The pasuk therefore adds, they were the ones who had the schus to take the Jewish, to go to the Pharaoh and speak, and have the Jewish people removed. As they spoke to the Pharaoh, the way they did their mission, it was expressed that these are the ones who mentioned earlier. Sheyoldi Yecheved la'Amram, that Yecheved and Amram had. That's in other words. Ados was Amar Avaya lahem. Yes, this that Hashem said to them, Chaytzi was Bnei Yisrael, is given weil sie haben übergenommen und gehalten, because they replaced and were holding by their Meile von Amram and Yecheved, the save love Amram and Yecheved, to them oisfir b'chol keicham, to carry out completely the Meratzon v'tzivi Hashem, the will and the command of Chodesh Baruch. So the Torah is telling us Moshe and Aaron shared the role of leadership. Why? They're the same parents. In as much as Moshe and Aaron shared the role of leadership, because they're the same parents, they were exactly the same. Now one more minute. Keep going. Now we're on page 66, in case you lost me. Second column at the top. But then it says something else. They were in their mission and their righteousness, from the beginning to the end. So it doesn't say Lashon Yachid, who, it says Heim Lashon Rab. Translates the Rebbe, does the Kavan as Heim B'shlichusam Rab Mitzvah. Here, the emphasis is on how there are two people. They, in their mission, fulfilled the mission with righteousness and with whatever, loyalty from the beginning to the end. Says the Rebbe, Yede Eine is Bifnei Atzmi. Each one is by themselves. And he explains. The idea that they're one and the same in their shlichus, in the mission, is one, is not to be their inyan. Hashem gives them words. The way the Eibishter gives them words, they are one in receiving those words. Mitzadem tzvive from the Eibishter. When it comes to fulfilling the Eibishter's mission, why? They come from the same parents. Their parents made sacrifices, they made the same sacrifices. So far we're underscoring how Aaron and Moshe are equal. How could two people in such a complicated mission be equal? And the answer is they come from the same parents. Aber, continues Rabbi, however, the Mile Ashlichas B'Payil, but they had to do it. In other words, the dedication, the loyalty, the sacrifice was the same. But the technique and the employing into actually getting it done is given nitpa efenacha. They were not the same. Not in zwei, in two different ways. But jeden einem von sie be'efen shein, each one was different. Moshe hat sich gedungen mit Neibishn. Moshe argued with Hashem. Hat gesagt, shlach na b'yatishlach, why are you sending me? Send somebody else. Moshe ein came by Aharon, as opposed to Aharon HaKohen, is as given in an oifen, it was in such a fashion, from v'racha v'samach b'libe, that Aharon has no issues. He sees Moshe. Moshe is afraid that Aharon is going to be jealous, and the Eibishter says he's going to be happy to see you. Not like you think, is going to be upset, you're becoming the leader. So Moshe Rabbeinu questions. Aharon accepts. These differences reflect not the dedication and loyalty to the mission, but to the implementation of it, how they did it. Uleidach, on the other hand, in their shlichus b'poil and doing the mission actually, is Moshe given the Reish Ike Moshe is the leader, when Aharon is by im given lepeu lamels, Aharon is subordinate to speak and to carry it out. Why? Because we're not talking about, if you will, where Moshe and Aharon came from, but where Moshe and Aharon are going to. So you have two psukim in a row that describe that the leaders of the Jewish people were Moshe and Aharon, which is very unusual. You don't usually have two people who share. One is usually a leader, and one is... And we argue that in their sharing there are two aspects. There's an aspect where they're identical, because of where they came from, and there's an aspect they were distinct, how they carry it out. Und das is Rashi Mosif bePirusha. Rashi adds this when he says the words umadgish heim in plural. They are bishlichusam ubitzidkasam, and their mission and their righteousness. As the lashon huda, that in this case when it says who, which means him, with the pasuk is magdim Moshe far Aharon, putting Moshe Rabbeinu first. But tzitzich of Moshe b'fnei atzmi, Aharon b'fnei atzmi. When it says Aharon first and Moshe second, the emphasis on how they're equal. When it says Moshe first and Aharon second, it's emphasizing how they're different. Und das is masbir as heim b'shlichusam u'bitzidkasam. They say they're two different people with two different purposes, but they're loyal to their mission and to their righteousness. That b'negeya damili ashlichas b'payim. When it comes to carrying out the mission, in fact, Zainen ze heim rabim, they're two different people. Translates the Rebbe, zwei bazundere ifanim b'shlichusam, two different ways of doing the mission. Which represent the different faculty strengths that they had. So, what's the point of the Sicha? What do we learn from the Sicha, if you will? What we learn from the Sicha is that the reason Aharon and Moshe were able to share one role is because they were able to be exactly the same in their dedication to the mission, because they came from the very, very same source. But at the same time, they were two people.